Prova microfono. Slide. Marco è già pronto, l'ho lasciato già pronto, sulla prima pagina è la tua.
take my partner in crime.
Buongiorno a tutti. Thanks everyone for being here. Some I know coming from very far with little sleep. I show you my sympathy because you know I feel you. Unisrat is extremely pleased to welcome this international conference on the human-centered business model, which is very dear to our hearts. This is not the first time, but the second that Unisrat hosts a moment of this project, which only really goes to show the importance we give to it, importance which does not only materialize in merely hosting the project and its workshops and conferences, but rather in our direct participation as co-leaders together with the University of Florence, which is a university I've gotten personally very accustomed to working with in one of the pillars on corporate governance. It is a very important project for us, for Unisrat, for two reasons. One, for the relevance of the topic, for which I will speak very briefly, and also for the people involved in it. Allow me first to perhaps start by singling out and showing my gratitude to each and every one of you who have contributed to writing papers, to the researchers, the authors, and all the experts that are here in the room and that at some point have provided input, and even more especially to those that will in the future, because we think this is a very long-ranging activity and has a lot of future. Allow me also, please, especially dear to me, to show my gratitude to the staff of Unisrat who have contributed to the organization of this event. Let me assure you, though, that that very same staff has done everything it's been able to do to prevent the guys working outside on the scaffolding from making noise today, but it has not been that easy. Either they don't come for 2 months, or when they come, they just can't stop. It's very strange. Two more references to end with the side of the people. First of all, to the person sitting next to me on my left, Marco Nicoli, whom I've had the pleasure of knowing for many years now. When we were both at the World Bank in Washington, I remember very well when he first came to the legal department, and he turned everything upside down and built from scratch a knowledge management of the unit. It was really a turning point for all of us before a new managing director came and reshuffled everything, and some of us were moved to different practice. But Marco is the heart of the soul of everything he does. So we are also very pleased to have him collaborate more stably with us here at Unisrat. So thank you, Marco. And we very much look forward to a future work together. And one final reference to someone who can't be here in person, but who is no doubt in spirit and at heart here very much, which is our dear president, Professor Alberto Mazzoni, who has always supported this project very intensely and who will continue to do that in the near future. He can't be here today, but he will no doubt be here the next time that there is an event of this of this project. Concerning the topic, and I promise not to bother you in more than 2 or 3 minutes. We think, well, it is evident to everyone that having a human-centered business model is extremely relevant because when we do make the equation between business and profit and we add nothing to that equation, there are problems that appear evidently and immediately. So there are externalities that free competition usually brings about. Everyone knows this. Markets are not perfect. They create issues in terms of gender, in terms of inequality, in terms of environmental problems, many other matters that need to be corrected. This is not the words of a socialist, but they're the words of David Ricardo, famous economist of England of hundreds of years ago. So everyone knows that market needs some corrections, and some of the damage created by the externalities produced by the mere equation between economic activity and profit are in order and have been in order for hundreds of years. Let me tell you that this type of work, the correction of the problems that arise as a consequence of this equation, business equals profit and nothing else, is something that's quite, it's unlike what you might think, something very close to the heart of UNITRAT. UNITRAT, which is an institution that works on the unification of private law, however, especially in the recent years, has done quite a lot of work to correct these problems. And let me just quote a few of those situations. One of them, or two of them that are very directly linked, would be our work on agricultural land investment contracts and contract farming. In UNITRAT, we have created a legal guide, and we're in the process of finalizing another legal guide on these topics, in which the focus and the main idea of these guides is precisely to ensure that the social consequences of certain private market investments do not harm people that are weaker, that create stable and reasonable reasons within the investment relationships, that land doesn't damage tenure, that it protects indigenous people, that their environmental concerns are taken into consideration in something as important for development as farming contracts, as investing in the acquisition of land. So that is precisely what UNITRAT does right now, in together partnering up with hugely important organizations such as FAO and IFAD, and Tom knows this very well. But not only. Think of something as strange and unrelated theoretically as the protection of cultural heritage. You know, there's the UNITRAT 1995 Convention. There we also regulate and help to regulate the part of the private market of illicitly trafficked cultural property. And therefore, it is by tackling within the system the problems created in the market of cultural property that UNITRAT contributes to its adequate regulation. So UNITRAT, as a private law institution from within market practice, is able to correct the problems that the market itself creates. So this is very much something that is at the core of our work. And one final point, this issue of human-centered business model really brings to the front line one of the main theoretical issues of UNITRAT, which is, should we opt for soft law? Should we go down the route of hard law? Is soft law enough to tackle the problems of the externalities created by market activity? It's unclear. Definitely, if we come up with good governance rules and good environmental protection rules, and every government adopts them, that is binding and that will work. But if only some of them do, then wouldn't that create a competitive disadvantage? Are countries that are developing or middle income prepared, just by merely enacting soft law, to the companies that comply with those rules? Are they going to be rewarded for them by the market? Are they not? If you are a company from Ruritania somewhere in deep Africa, and you comply with the gender equality rule, or you comply with a rule that protects the environment, are investors and shareholders and clients of the Ruritanian market going to reward you for it? Or maybe they will just buy the products of the next company that will not comply, therefore will incur in less costs, and therefore will profit from your good well-doing. All these theoretical issues are at the very heart of the work of this project, and this is a house of thought and house of knowledge, and therefore we are very happy to host this, and we are really looking forward to the next couple of days with the work on the principles and the governance structure, and we hope that this debate will arise and will inform our own activity. So thank you, and I apologize for my long intervention. I will give now the floor to Marco Nipli.
Thank you, Ignacio, and also on behalf of the OECD Development Center, I'm welcoming you and thanking Ignacio and UniDroit as an institution for hosting this event. I've been working with the staff very closely to organize these 2 days. And of course, thanks to everybody who's today with us, to the participants, to the partners, the panelists, and to the authors of, we have 3 of the authors of the research papers. They did a great work. I'm sure that you had the opportunity to read, and you agree with me that the content is very substantial. We look forward to a very open and frank discussion during the workshops, because we really would like to get all the feedbacks, positive and negative, and critics, in order to further improve eventually the quality of these papers. Also, thanks to 2 of the sponsors of the project that have been long-time sponsors. One is the French government, and the other is the OPEC Fund for International Development, also known as OFID. So these 2 organizations have been sponsoring our project from the very inception, and we are very grateful to them. Here we are. Okay, for those of you that are not familiar with the project, I would give a very little introduction. Again, we cannot go into the details of the project because there are documents that are much comprehensive about the spirit, the differences between this project and other initiatives. So let me start by saying that the human-centered business model is a project that was developed in the framework of a broader initiative. It's a global initiative called the Global Forum for Justice and Development. My colleague, Laurence Costa, is the current manager of the Global Forum. It's a permanent forum for knowledge dissemination and sharing, but also for the co-generation of innovative legal solutions to development challenges. And this is, in fact, the spirit of this project is to be innovative and to look at legal solutions to a long-term challenge. So the project was born in this framework and is still rooted in this global forum. It is currently led by OECD Dev, which is the development agency of OECD, but again, with the highest respect to and the share ownership with all the partners, because this project has been going on now for about 3 years. We have a total of over 46 partners. And we have many peer reviewers at individual level. In this slide, just an idea about what is the distribution in terms of what are the institutions that are participating. So we have a lot of academia. We have 7 international organizations, including, of course, UNIDROIT, the World Bank, IMF, the European Public Law Organization, and so on. We have the International Union of Notaries, which is also very interesting, can bring a very interesting contribution. We have 3 governments. We only have at the moment 4 representatives from the private sector. Margherita Bianchini, that later on will be part of the panel, is representing Assonime, which is the largest Italian association of public company, correct? So we look forward to improve and to increase the number of these of the private sector participation. So as I said, the project is really a teamwork. It's not just led by OECD, but OECD is the facilitator, the convener, and the coordinator. This is very important. This is the geographic distribution of the partners. We have a large participation of Italian partners, not because of any particular reasons. I guess. No, I didn't target any specific Italian partner. I guess it is a cultural issue, honestly. I mean, in Italy we have a very long tradition of entrepreneurs. The non-Italians do not know, but Adriano Olivetti was a visionary of a model of doing business about 40 years ago, 50 years ago, probably. So we have the large experience of cooperatives and many other things. So very likely this imbalance is due to these cultural issues. But we are looking forward to improve and increase the participation of other countries. Okay, so just a few highlights of the project. So what are we trying to do is to build an alternative approach to a sustainable way of doing business. And in a way, what we want to do is to create a third option between the current 2 main. Let me brutally simplify. On one side, we have the profit corporations that are looking at profit maximization. On the other hand, we have the galaxy of social enterprises, benefit a number of other very different animals. But let's cluster in something that we can call the no profit or social. So what we want to do is to give a third option, something that is combining the goodwill of the social enterprises with the sustainability of the for-profit. And it's a model that is including putting at the same level, at same importance, the economic sustainability, so profit, but without the objective of its maximization, and a a number of social, environmental, and ethical principles. So all of this on the same level. This is a big paradigm shift. And one of the characteristics of this, what we call model, is because we have a systemic approach. So we're not just looking at the legal form. We are looking at the entire business ecosystem. So we start from what are the values and the principles of this enterprise, which will be embedded in their bylaws. So I would say the commitment from the enterprise is much stronger than the corporate social responsibility policies. Then we have, of course, this implies a different legal framework and especially governance structure, which is the second pillar of this model, because we need to imagine and be creative about what are the governance bodies that can ensure the voice of the stakeholders to counterbalance the voice of the shareholders. The third pillar is related to what are the financial instruments that this model of enterprise will be able to access. So, of course, we believe that now more and more the entire movement of impact financing will be a good partner for this enterprise. But the bulk of investors still look at maximizing their investment, return on investment. So, but likely we need to identify a menu of different options, and we are looking worldwide to examples of risk capital, but also debt capital, so equities, but also loans, and also hybrid solutions like in some instruments of the Islamic finance. The next pillar is very sensitive, and it's a fiscal regime. And we will have an ad hoc event to discuss as soon as the research paper will be ready. But just to give you a flavor, the idea is to propose a fiscal regime that will not create a market distortion. Instead, it's a system that will level the playing field. So, as Ignacio was saying, if the enterprise that behave in a socially, environmentally, and ethically sustainable way is not recognized, then it will be a disadvantage versus the business as usual company that will instead externalize some costs. So the idea is to propose a very innovative, fiscal regime that will create with a combination of incentives and disincentives, will push with the market forces the behavior of enterprises toward the good behavior, the sustainable behavior. The fifth pillar is related to the procurement policies, and this means that what we look at in this business ecosystem is to include a comprehensive approach also from the public procurement in terms of recognizing the value, the social value, the environmental value of enterprises that are pursuing these kind of sustainable objectives. I have to say that in addition to the public procurement, there is a growing practice from the private sector which is in fact looking at their supply chain and selecting their own suppliers based on the suppliers' compliance with human rights, some social behaviors, and environmental practices and integrity. So, in a way, what we are trying to do, if you have this in mind, this model, we are trying to build an enterprise that has in its own DNA, if we can say, elements and objectives and performance indicators of principles that are now more and more requested by the market. So in a way, the human-centered enterprise pursuing this minimum common denominator of principles has a competitive advantage in terms of access to finance, to access to a taxation that will recognize the positive impact on society, and access to markets. And not to mention, of course, the role that the consumers can play. So in many countries, we have already the market that is asking for, biologic foods. How they are called in the US? Organic food. So in Italy, because it's called bio, in the US is organic. So the consumers at the end will make a huge difference in this for the success of this model. So this is in very short the picture of the project. I wanted to take a few more minutes. We are also waiting for Mr. Mauro del Barba, who's the relator of the Italian law on benefit corporations. He's on his way, so we look forward to get him. So what is the status of the project nowadays? So we have, as I said, a couple of sponsors from the French government and OFID. Sorry. Thanks. And right now we are developing a number of research papers that will give more substance to these ideas and the structure of the project. So we want to provide more meat for each of the pillars. And in these 2 days, we will discuss, in fact, 2 research papers. One is prepared by Professor Zorzi and Diletta Lenzi on the legal framework and governance. The other one has been. The other 2 are developed, are related to the guiding principles on social and environmental sustainability. And one of the authors is Teodorina Lesidrenska, that will join us also for the rest of the week and first of all for discussion. So we are going to, in a way, validate the work and the conclusions and the proposals that are arising from these research papers. The inputs that we receive during these days and during the workshops will help us to improve the documents and that then will be published and disseminated. For the other pillars, we have similar research papers under development, and we'll organize. Probably not in Rome. Don't worry. No. Not in Rome, but probably in other venues and locations. The discussion for the validation. Next steps. So as I mentioned before, the overall project will be presented by OECD Dev to governments of developed and developing countries for a possible implementation of pilot projects at national or subnational level. Professor Juli Poncesole and Professor Marta Ortega will later on tell us about some interest from the metropolitan area of Barcelona to possibly be a pilot. We also received an expression of interest from the municipality of Athens, but basically, we will pursue these two opportunities plus the presentation of the project to a number of developing countries. The pilot projects will clearly require a strong involvement of current and new partners. Because the moment that we will work on very specific countries, we will need more expertise and human resources to do this. As I said, OECD Dev will coordinate also the search for funding and for the project implementation. And the role of OECD Dev is both as coordinator of project partners, but also the catalyst and the convener of OECD directorates like the legal, the statistics, and other the employment that will bring their very professional contribution to the project. So with this, I'm glad to see that Senator Mauro Del Barba is arrived. Welcome. And I move to conclude my presentation. I thank you very much. And of course, we are available to follow up with each of you for further conversation and collaboration. Thank you for your attention. And Senator or Honorable? Senator?
Like you want. I prefer Senator, but
Senator, okay.
Actually, I am a deputy, so.
Senator Del Barba is very well known. He was the relator of the law on benefit corporation in Italy, the author and the relator. So we are glad to have Senator Del Barba with us today, and we'll be pleased if you could address to our participants a few remarks.
No. So thank you, Nicola, for your kind invitation. I briefly speak about benefit corporation on Italy because we think that human-centered business model is an affair that is very well related to our law. In Italy, we have this kind of law since 2016. We were the second country after United States having this kind of law. Effectively, the first country, because in the United States only 31 at the time, now 36 states had this kind of law. We think that benefit corporations are completely related to the theme this morning we are going to develop, because this law is a law that allow companies to address their action in a sustainable way. Why the law is necessary? Because this kind of law permit the companies to put in their charter any other objectives that impact on common benefit, social and environmental benefit. In this way, companies must give with the budget an annual report referring to this common benefit, and they must calculate, they must develop a sort of measure on impact, the external input, how the external input impact on society. This involves a sort of new responsibility for the executives of the companies. These responsibilities is introduced by law, and more or less these are the fundamentals, the pillars of benefit corporation. I think that this kind of legislation could be the good field where to put our experiment, where to attempt to realize this human-centered business model. The advantage is that in Italy and the United States, and now in Colombia, since July of this year, the law also permit what we want to do. And we don't need a special partnership with the government, but we can have a special partnership, because if we have this kind of law, probably, and I'm sure that this is the Italy circumstances, probably the government should be available to realize an agreement in this direction. Benefit corporation are going to be the mainstream, I suppose, not only in Italy, in the United States, in Colombia, because many other countries are developing similar laws. And we know that there are more than 8 countries that at the moment are going to finish the law, or are going to discussing the same law. So I would like to address our work today, thinking about how benefit corporation can be useful in your and our research field. Thank you very much.
So I'm pleased to say that now it's coffee time. So we are going to have a coffee break, and we'll reconvene. We're a little bit late because we're waiting for the senator to join us. So let's say let's reconvene in 15 minutes. 10:30. The coffee, if I'm not wrong, it will be upstairs, right? In the room upstairs. But I will give you directions outside of the door.
So if it's not right outside, then it will be upstairs.
Yeah.
In the second floor. So.
Thank you very much, and we are available for also conversation during the coffee break.
Sorry, upstairs means you have to cross to the other building and then go to the second floor.
But we'll be there to give directions. Thank you.
Marco, scusami, mi scusi se non come sono prepotenti, ma lui non c'è più, ha lasciato le sue cose. Sì, però non... Se non le dà,
Prima, Marco, scusi, Marco, prima chi parla? Lei
Lo tolgo?
Claudio. Prova 1, 2, 3, prova.
this. There you go. So welcome back. I'd like to thank UNIDROIT too, in particular in the person of Secretary General Professor Tirado and Senior Officer Frédéric Mestre for the hospitality and for letting me be here. I feel absolutely inadequate to be in this position as I'm surrounded by veteran professors of high standing. So it's just, it must be seen as an accident, and that's kind of, that I'm here rather than somewhere else. So there is a slight altering of the order of the agenda. I don't have. We're slightly late, not so late. So I will avoid any introductory remarks on the project that has already been. Marco Nicoli has already gone through the project, and perhaps if we have time, I will say just a couple of comments at the end. I think the only thing I'd like to say since the beginning is that Professor Tirado already brought the subject matter on the table. Is soft law enough? Well, probably not. But it's already something, and the human-centered business model should be seen as a market-driven model, should be seen as a model that is of voluntary adoption and should attract investment, and not only consumer attention, but also investor attention on the basis of its characteristics. And that's, I think, is the main competitive advantage. To some extent, this is common also to other forms of, I would say, social, in quotation marks, enterprise. But since the project entails also other kinds of advantages, I think we should think of something stronger and a commitment that is perhaps more credible than benefit companies alone. So I think we should isolate a subset of companies, perhaps using the benefit company. That's probably the model to be used to engage with a public of investors and customers and clients. Anyway, I won't speak any longer, and I would like to invite Professor McInerney to talk about, I would say, the overall context of responsible business conduct. So please.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the Secretary General of UNIDROIT, Tirado, and all other colleagues at UNIDROIT, particularly Frédéric Mestre for her support in this project, and also Marco Nicoli for inviting me to speak this morning and share some thoughts on this important project. As Professor Zorzi said, I was going to provide some overall comments to help set the scene about the state of business responsibility globally. And I think that this project comes at an opportune moment because there are many different things that have been developing. And I think overall, what I want to suggest is that the weft and warp of business responsibility standards are being woven together in a tighter fashion than has happened before. And that together, these forces are creating a new cloth, if you will, of global business regulation that will, over time, continue to ratchet up the expectations on business to improve their conduct around the world. And there are three main trends that I see happening. There is a growth in voluntary aspirational standards that businesses are using to improve their conduct. But there's a second aspect, which is the growth of more normative standards that may not be binding from a legal standpoint, but create expectations on companies, on boards of directors, on management to put in place due diligence standards to monitor and oversee their conduct in new ways that are more rigorous than what a purely voluntary standard would normally require. And the third aspect is the increasing rigor of global white-collar crime standards. And in this regard, the OECD has been a leading organization and has really contributed to widening and deepening the level of white-collar crime regulation globally. So in terms of the first issue I'd mention, in terms of these voluntary standards, I have in mind in particular the Sustainable Development Goals and Global Compact, which are not binding standards on companies. They're frameworks that companies are using to improve their conduct. And companies are not subject, for instance, to the SDGs, but are incorporating the SDGs into their work, into their practices, choosing from aspects of the SDGs that are relevant to their business. And this is more of a pull kind of standard. It's not a push. They're not being pushed to do this, but they are seeking out these goals, and they're putting them into their practices as a way to demonstrate their social responsibility. This is a different way of thinking about corporate social responsibility than existed in the past, when it was really completely subjective up to different companies as to what they would choose to do. Now companies are choosing to act on these SDGs, which have oftentimes hard law elements to them, be it human rights, be it environmental protection, labor protection, but they are voluntarily choosing to do so. The second element pertains to the growth of harder normative standards, which may not be legally binding on companies, but have a level of normativity to them that they are really no longer voluntary for companies, and they create an obligation to put in place due diligence practices to act on them. And in this regard, I have in particular in mind the growth of the human rights and business framework, led by the guiding principles on business and human rights of the United Nations, but the incorporation of human rights norms and standards in a variety of different areas, in terms of sectoral guidance in different industries, be it the extractives industries or agriculture, and the elaboration of additional standards in the areas of land and natural resources, such as the voluntary guidelines on the governance of tenure within the Committee on World Food Security, or the principles on responsible agricultural investment, also developed through the CFS. And follow-on guidance from those norms and standards, such as the Guide to Contract Farming that was developed in cooperation with UNIDROIT, IFAD, and FAO, or the new guide that is underway on agricultural investment contracting practices, also being developed under the auspices of UNIDROIT. So these standards have influenced the practices, for instance, of international financial institutions and helped contribute to tightening the safeguard standards by these main development agencies. And you also see, for instance, the OECD guidelines on multinational enterprises, which have been further refined following the development of the UN guiding principles, business and human rights, to incorporate those human rights standards. So these standards are contributing to companies' enhanced due diligence practices. You see it in supply chain management practices, where companies are not only auditing, but engaging in a real risk-based approach to examining what the full range of risks they have throughout their supply chains, be it from the risk of human trafficking in the supply chain, the human slavery, to the use of conflict minerals. All of these different standards are, in many cases, voluntary. The human trafficking, no, but the conflict minerals, for instance, in many jurisdictions is a voluntary undertaking, but companies are putting in place really rigorous systems to monitor the entirety of their supply chain. But aside from these more voluntary or softish kinds of standards, you have the growth of a really rigorous system of white-collar crime law and enforcement globally. And here we see three main trends that I'll mention. The first is the development of global anti-corruption law. And here the OECD Convention on Bribery has been a main driver, and that has fed into the development of the UN Convention Against Corruption. But within the OECD Convention on Bribery, you see that standards, more specific standards relating to company practices such as compliance, ethics, internal controls have been elaborated to help inform regulators and enforcement agencies as to what standards companies need to follow, and then that in turn is being adopted by companies. You also have the attention to the relationship between corruption and tax evasion, and a growth in the overall approach to improving tax compliance through initiatives such as the BEPS initiative and other initiatives for tax administration cooperation between countries. So the base erosion and profit shifting program of the OECD has led to the development of particular regulatory instruments, such as the approach to country-by-country reporting on transfer pricing matters. This is going to dramatically ratchet up the level of scrutiny on multinational enterprises, abusive use of exploiting gaps between different tax jurisdictions. It is also going to increase the amount of information available to regulatory and enforcement authorities to address issues such as corruption or money laundering. You also have the growth of mutual administrative assistance between tax authorities and the creation of the approach to the automatic exchange of information between tax authorities, which has all been developed following the Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters. And finally, you have the whole anti-money laundering regime, which continues to be more rigorous. And as we've seen in recent weeks following some major money laundering scandals that have emerged in Europe, we see that the teeth of anti-money laundering law continues to grow. Now, these white-collar crime initiatives at the international level are hard law systems in many ways, and they have within themselves enforcement mechanisms. So, for instance, you have within the OECD Convention on Bribery, you have a rigorous system of peer review of not only how countries have implemented anti-bribery laws, but also how they're enforcing that. And that's a very dynamic and very rigorous process. You also have the system of peer review relating to anti-money laundering and countering financing of terrorism laws under the FATF, Financial Action Task Force. And you have a system in the tax realm for the Joint International Task Force on Shared Intelligence and Collaboration between tax authorities among 37 different jurisdictions. So together, these various systems of white-collar crime enforcement are having a big impact. And among the ways in which they are having impact is through increased domestic enforcement of white-collar crime, also facilitating interagency enforcement activities between, say, tax authorities and anti-corruption authorities and banking authorities. You have, as a result of the various international conventions that have been developed, you have much more cooperation in terms of mutual legal assistance between countries, and extradition has been streamlined. You see greater cooperation between national enforcement authorities across different countries. And the criminal law standards applicable to enterprises has become much more standardized with, for instance, the bribery convention, the OECD bribery conventions, creation of a system for enterprise criminal liability. So the implications of some of these changes are, for one, enforcement is increasing. Two, I think boards of directors are under much greater scrutiny and have a much greater due diligence obligation to ensure that the companies on which they sit are being managed properly. From the standpoint of regulatory theory overall, I think these various trends, on the one hand, the voluntary aspirational kinds of standards like the Sustainable Development Goals, to the more normatively rigorous standards deriving from human rights and business norms and standards, to these white-collar criminal laws that involve potential criminal liability on enterprises. You see that there is a range of different drivers of corporate compliance and corporate ethics. And from the standpoint of regulatory theory, this is desirable. Typically, we think of compliance in terms of compliance with one set of regulations. So, for instance, you think of a company that is a public company that is subject to securities law regulatory filing requirements, and you think, what is the incentive for management or boards of directors to accurately disclose matters in their documentation? Well, what I'm suggesting is that rather than think of the business compliance obligation from the standpoint of a narrow, limited area of law, that what we see is that there is a overall complex of regulations and soft law standards that, taken together, provide both carrots and sticks in terms of encouraging companies to do the right thing. So the carrots involve things like the voluntary standards that I described in terms of choosing to adhere to various elements of the Sustainable Development Goals, or choosing to become a member of the Global Compact, where companies also have a more rigorous obligation to apply some of these human rights standards, where the reputational effects can be really tremendous. And in some cases, these standards that are have their roots in soft law instruments are taking on hard law application in terms of, as I suggested, the IFI social safeguards standards, also in procurement practices, in terms of also voluntary systems that companies are agreeing to be a part of. So things like the Global Reporting Initiative or the ISO 26,000 on corporate social responsibility. All of these things are creating a more normative expectation of what companies should do. And finally, the most rigorous approach involves ultimately white-collar crime enforcement. And so, and that's where the real stick comes in. And so rather than thinking about companies' social responsibility from the narrow standpoint of complying only with the laws that are mandatory or that carry with them criminal responsibility, I think boards of directors need to think of things in this broader perspective and need to think of things from the standpoint of the spillover benefits associated with adhering to some of these positive or more aspirational standards of social responsibility, not only because they want to do good, but because they can see that by raising their overall standards of conduct, they can also be contributing to their overall compliance practices as a company. And I think overall, it makes it harder for companies to say, we're going to choose not to comply with certain areas of, let's say, norms that are not mandatory yet, and deciding that they're going to maintain a more equal level of practice across the enterprise. And I think these three trends, these voluntary standards, the more rigorous human rights standards that may not be binding on companies per se, but carry with them a great deal of reputational risk, and the increasing rigor of the white-collar crime frameworks at the global level are contributing to heightened expectations and are ultimately setting the background against which something like this human-centered business model becomes very relevant to the way business operates today. So that's what I wanted to share to start off some of our discussions. I hope that was useful, and I'm happy to take any questions afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this such a clear illustration of the status quo, let's say, of the of what happens within especially major firms. Let me now invite Professor Isabella Bunn to speak about trends, if I'm not mistaken, about transforming that are transforming now corporate responsibility and how this links to the human-centered business model. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I want to begin with a confession, which was when Marco first told me about this idea for a human-centered business model. It must have been maybe 4, maybe 5 years ago in the context of the Law, Justice, and Development Forum at the World Bank and my own work with the American Bar Association. I thought it was interesting. I was immediately reminded of the famous book about small is beautiful, economics as if people mattered. I guess we can all show our age when we talk about when laws are passed, there's no hiding from it, or when books are published. But also thinking about the World Bank, human face for structural adjustment. Those reports about needing a human face for structural adjustment were controversial, but at the same time really transformed the work of the World Bank. And I think you could draw a direct line to its pro-poverty reduction focus because of that change in World Bank policy. So that's what I thought of when I thought about the human. But I also remember having this exact impression, a human-centered business model. I thought that Marco was trying to develop an answer to a question that had not yet been asked. So I'm here to tell you today that I was wrong, that Marco was right. And I know there's antecedent work also even here in this magnificent setting about the human-centered business corporation. And I also want to say that the genius of the approach is not just in looking at a particular legal form, but actually this whole notion of an ecosystem, which moves us not just towards a human-centered business model, but really towards humanity in the global economy. And the second brilliant aspect is this undergirding foundation of values. From our very first conversation with Marco, it was about values, understanding them. How does that feed into the culture? And what difference does that make? So I know we're going to be talking about any number of topics, including the Sustainable Development Goals, and I will be returning to that. But one thing in particular, as I think through our agenda, is linking our agenda with other agendas around the world that are moving forward, not just in terms of information to develop our own research, but also in practical terms. What do we see moving forward that we can incorporate ideas from the human-centered business model and then really get traction in sense of not just ideas, but also in practice? But as a very preliminary point on the Sustainable Development Agenda, I think two things are happening. We're obviously experiencing new actors in this whole space of global development and everything that's associated with it on a very multidisciplinary scale. Thousands of institutions are now engaging with development that never engaged with development before. And that also includes, to the point that Thomas mentioned, it includes the business corporation. So we have this enormous opportunity as companies are awakening to their expanded responsibilities in the global economy. How do we harness that momentum? And it's also, I think we could say this here and not be corrected later, which is it is going to change the business corporation forever. So we are on this cusp of major institutional change, and we can take advantage of that to promote this agenda that we're discussing, including this emphasis of this integrated idea of development. And the second part, to the point I raised about values, is the shared values that are being generated and reinforced through this SDG process. It's not just going to expire at 2030 when people are going to be going through how well did we do in different jurisdictions on each of the goals and all the indicators and all the targets and so forth. It again is going to change the global economy forever. So we're looking at systemic change, and the beauty of this project is it's reminding us to look at ideas like equity, dignity, equality, participation, accountability, social justice, solidarity. And the other thing that Marco has done from the outset in setting that forward is drawing on the traditions, various religious traditions. It's why people do things, and really showing this depth of what we might say, building a culture of stewardship, to use that very resonant term. So I think this is the other both challenge and opportunity that we have, but it is a unique moment in history because of the SDGs to draw on corporate engagement as we've never seen it, and a concern about values as we've never seen it. So I have 5 maybe questions that I will ask, that the answer to part of it, of course, a partial answer is found in the human-centered business model. The first one being, how can we build a more equitable and inclusive market economy? I don't have to tell this room, over the past years, the whole idea of capitalism has been the subject of much scrutiny and a number of critiques, both, let's say, in the written form of publishing, but also a number of initiatives. They are reevaluating this whole system of capitalism from a variety of perspectives. Some new approaches are being introduced, but also revisiting works by Adam Smith, Karl Marx, Max Weber, Milton Friedman, and others. Some of this grows out of the concerns about globalization, further impetus, of course, from the global financial crisis. And you see the themes very much resonate with what we're trying to do here today. It almost reads like our own agenda. geopolitical and systemic threats, corporate purpose and governance, corporate values, ethics, social responsibility, accountability, enforcement, the nature of work, executive compensation, reinvention of the corporation, shareholders, stakeholders, equality, trust, industrial restructuring, internalization of externalities, and so forth. I have a list of probably a dozen books, and I'll be happy to share those with Marco. We can circulate some of these ideas later, including, of course, Thomas Piketty talked about Capital in the 21st Century, a surprise bestseller. Robert Reich talked about saving capitalism for the many, not the few. John Plender, Capitalism, Money, Morals, and Markets. Bruno Roche, Completing Capitalism, Heal Business to Heal the World. And also I wanted to mention Paul Collier, who may be known to you. He has just released, I went to the launch a couple of weeks ago, The Future of Capitalism, Facing the New Anxieties. And the reason his name may be familiar to you is because he had a surprise bestseller in the form of The Bottom Billion. And you know how transformative that was in really thinking about the people that are the most left behind of those left behind in the global economy. And what do you do in every aspect, including even things like marketing and supply chain and the size of packets of detergent that you can serve those people and recognize them and bring them into the economy, which is what this model is all about, is this inclusion aspect. And there is a huge human aspect. Paul Collier is from Sheffield. I mean, he's a brilliant man, but he had a tough upbringing. And he sees that this is what he says about the book, deep new rifts are tearing apart the fabric of Britain and other Western societies, thriving cities versus the provinces, the highly skilled elite versus the less educated, wealthy versus developing countries. As these divides deepen, we have lost the sense of ethical obligation to others that was crucial to the rise of post-war social democracy. And these rifts have been answered by revivalist ideologies of populism and socialism, leading to seismic political upheaval. So I think we'll look for that book to appear on the bestseller list. But again, it's an enormous platform that we can also use to say we've got to look at the human in a systemic way. There are also some very interesting initiatives happening around the world to promote really a modified, revised, revitalized form of capitalism. I wanted to mention one in particular, the Coalition for Inclusive Capitalism, which was formed a few years ago by Lady de Rothschild. And yes, if you have that kind of convening power, it does attract the highest level of business, financial, government leaders to pay attention to what is this idea of inclusive capitalism? How can we make it more equitable? How can we make it more sustainable? If you look at the website, you'll see that they've had a number of conferences, which literally includes the elite of the world, but actually paying attention to, we need to rethink the entire project of capitalism. Their next meeting is taking place actually in about a week's time in Washington, D.C. So you will also see new materials being generated from that, really pushing, among other things, a long-term perspective to business. And how do you then actually make the changes to make that happen? So my second question, so not unrelated, is how can the business corporation be redefined for the 21st century? Now, a core challenge, of course, is the purpose of the corporation and the legacy of the Friedman Doctrine. It's been alluded to here when we talk about these tensions about social purpose and the purpose, profit purpose. You'll recall that in 1962, Milton Friedman set forth a framework which he described the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits, of course, within the rules of the game. And this has led to really a dominance of shareholder protection and bolstering over a period of decades. And I think we can see that this is now changing. In particular, again, almost hot off the press, but there's a project that is being led by the British Academy, which is the sort of social science and humanities convener in the United Kingdom, and led by Colin Meyer, who's the former dean at the Said Business School at Oxford University. He's now, of course, still a professor there. But they launched a major 3-year research project, including public engagement and of course, to create a real substantial evidence base to redefine business for the 21st century and build trust between business and society. I think many of these questions we're talking about today, it's really a redefinition of what is the relationship between society and business. So one of the things they want to do, of course, is to develop a series of papers, which they have just released, and then also look to the policy engagement to make a practical difference. The first set of research, again, I think you'll hear a lot of resonance with what we're talking about. And this is a team of top academics from all over the world who participated. 10 themes: history, trust, corporate purpose, corporate culture, technology, corporate governance, long-term investment, ownership, law, taxation, regulation, and so forth. And literally, just last week was the launch of the first phase of the research. It took place at the Guildhall in London. Those of you who know the Guildhall, you know that this is almost the first place where this intersection between commercial activity and, let's call it, the prototype of regulation actually took hold at the Guildhall in the then, well, still called the City of London. So it was the perfect place to start rethinking the corporation. The framework that they're developing now focuses on defining and aligning corporate purpose. And you could imagine, based on what I'm saying, it's a move away from profits. It's a move away to thinking more deeply about the social purposes of business. It is a commitment to embed trustworthiness and also to create an enabling culture. So the next phase of research is about to be launched, and this is going to have a policy focus, and I'd like to just briefly read the headlines for what is going to be examined, because I think, once again, we're going to find synergies and perhaps opportunities to engage in this process. I'm going to have to invite all of you to come to the Guildhall or to Oxford so we can continue the conversation. So the first of these, and they're calling these levers of policy change. In other words, where are we going to find the leverage to actually make things happen? The first of this is ownership. Next is corporate governance. The third is regulation. The fourth is taxation. And the final one is investment. So even though this is a project grounded in social sciences and humanities, of course, with a large dose of business advice, I can't help but think that lawyers in particular have a very big chance to react with this agenda and think through. And I think the research that's being conducted as part of this project will find a real connectivity and resonance in moving these ideas forward. So speaking of sort of measurement and management, which is also another sub-theme here, saying whatever we're doing in terms of framework, whatever we're doing in terms of policy, let's not forget, we've got to get the measurement and management of those processes right. And it's been alluded to earlier today, also talking about finance and this whole pillar that forms what we're trying to accomplish with the human business corporation. What are these dynamics of sustainable value creation and measurement? And just to touch on something Thomas already mentioned, environmental social governance. We're finding increasing pressures to report on those factors, including through, for example, the Global Reporting Initiative, the Integrated Reporting Initiative as well. How can these be mainstreamed into corporate reporting? And then secondly, you'll see another trend, which I think if it's successful will be hugely impactful, which is how do we actually start internalizing some of these externalities? How do we start thinking about the capitals, whether it's human capital, whether it's natural capital, and then really devise ways that this will change company valuation? And already when I say human capital, the World Bank has launched a major project on human capital. The World Economic Forum has also advanced this idea of human capital. Most of that will be at the country level, but that's also a very good thing in terms of what we're trying, has the same word. We can play off the human. It'll be at the country level, but attention will be given to that. And measurement will be taking place about how can a country use human capital. Our question more narrow will be, how can a company start measuring human capital? And the point is, the old cliche, I think Henry Ford, what gets measured gets done. So if we can start thinking seriously about these metrics for capitals, including human capital, in terms of valuation for the company, that could absolutely be transformative, because then that is what investors will look at. And then that is the conduct that will be rewarded on the part of the businesses themselves. So I think there's an enormous opportunity here. And there's a lot happening in this space, including there's a social and human capital coalition that has done some very interesting work and consultations, and they're continuing to refine their protocol, which will be launched early next year. So it's something that we could interrogate, I think, as part of this project. Also, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Boards is doing work in this area, and a number of others. So the fourth question: how can business and finance advance an integrated, multidimensional agenda for sustainable development? And of course, much could be said about the SDGs, and we've alluded to that already. But I think one item, and it really goes to what Thomas was describing, there is this enormous amount of activity now in soft law and hard law and standards and compliance in different assessments of reputational risk that is happening, which is really going to be moving forward this whole, it's going to be redefining. And I can't tell you, I've been to a number of conferences where people actually say corporate social responsibility is dead. So we are now reinventing something that's been around, let's say, for a generation, and it's an opportunity. It's no longer going to be an optional extra someplace in the communications or public relations department. It is going to be integrated across the entire business organization. So that is something that we can certainly take advantage of. The United Nations Global Compact was mentioned. I think it's really interesting. It is the world's largest voluntary organization of this type. It has restructured its entire platform really around this concept of corporate sustainability. And the SDGs dominate most of its work now. Some people will even complain, where are those original 10 principles? You know, all I see now is SDGs. So they have refitted what they're doing around a blueprint for SDG leadership. But it's interesting, I noticed a couple of years ago in one of these massive, you know, heavily, lavishly produced, probably not very sustainable reports that was funded outside the UN Global Compact, it says it's significant, I mean, to me, it was significant that this report prepared for the UN Global Compact, they did this big launch on business as a force for good. It identified a persistent gap as businesses seek to become more sustainable, this misalignment between intentions and actions. And I was also struck, the OECD has prepared, in part of their work on responsible business conduct, a briefing paper that related to the SDGs. And it observes that all businesses, regardless of their legal status, size, ownership, sector, or location, are expected to avoid and address adverse impacts of their operations while contributing to sustainable development in the context in which they operate. So obviously this encompasses impacts beyond the company itself and a consideration of environmental and social questions. However, that same briefing paper acknowledges that while such standards could be transformative, thus far they remain, quote, an underutilized way for businesses to interact with the SDGs and ultimately maximize their contribution to the SDGs. So the human-centered business model can, I think, enter into this space in this broader context as sustainable development thinking is in some ways supplanting corporate social responsibility thinking, and close that gap between intentions and actions. And so once again, I think you see that this notion of the ecosystem and this notion of values will play into that. So finally, a few of you have noticed my poppy, which is a tradition in the United Kingdom recognizing the end of the First World War. And I wear it because I've been an expatriate for 30 years. Obviously, it relates, the memory is associated with Flanders Fields, but I think it could just as easily be associated with Monte Cassino. So the poppy, of course, this represents peace. And we know that just yesterday, 100 years of the end of the First World War, and you've seen the headlines, you've seen the television reports about the events in Paris to commemorate that. And in this context, we might think, well, peace, there's SDG 16, we have perhaps an avenue to be thinking about businesses in terms of peace. And I think it really is an interesting question. How can the private sector be more engaged in those questions? And there are platforms being developed to do that. But what struck me was, what you might not know is, yes, there are a lot of ceremonies yesterday honoring the war dead. But today and tomorrow in Paris, there is a Paris Peace Forum. And this is the headline: Global Platform for Governance Projects. The vision of Macron was not just to celebrate the past and the death and the destruction of war, but to think about, how do we prevent war? And he sees governance broadly defined as the secret to that, as the foundation for that. And that is what we're building on this weekend, literally. If I wasn't here, I would be in Paris. I would be thinking about these things, because I would be thinking, how can we bring this human-centered business project, which really focuses so much on corporate governance, into the space about governance, and how that then could enhance peace. And it's no secret, looking around the room, when we think about our supporters, the OECD, the World Bank, UNIDROIT, we are talking about organizations that are integral to global governance. And we can start thinking about those relationships between global governance and corporate governance. But these are also organizations that understand the profound link between peace and prosperity. And this is where the private sector comes in. This is where the global economy and the values and conduct that underpin it come in. So I think we have an enormous proverbial challenge and an enormous opportunity here. And I think these 5 questions that I am now asking, that Marco has tried to answer, I think his foresight and his leadership have been incredible in pointing us in this direction. And I think that now this is a question that the world is asking. Thank you.
Thank you very much for such an inspiring, not only interesting, but really inspiring speech. Let me now invite Professors Ponce Solé and Ortega Gomez to speak about, with the aid of slides, I think this time, about their role in this project and the Pillar 1. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I have the device. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I have it. I can change. Oh. Well, thank you. Good morning. First of all, thank you for the opportunity of being here today. Thanks to the organization. Thanks to Marco Nicoli, the soul of the souls of the project. It's a pleasure to be here. We are going to share a brief intervention. We are going to divide our time. And we would like to talk about basically 3 questions with a special emphasis in the third question, the future, the conclusions of our collaboration in the project until now and the future possible developments. I'm going to tell you something about Transuse. I'm here as the current director of that institute. I'm going to tell you some ideas about our collaboration and our inputs in the project. And finally, where we are and where we want to go. And we have to decide together where we want to go. So, let me begin briefly with Transuse. Marta and I, we are members of Transuse. Transuse is a research institute of the University of Barcelona. The University of Barcelona is a member of the LERU, the League of Research, the European League of Research Universities. The Transuse includes more than 60 researchers of all legal areas, private and public, but we include 2 other researchers from other disciplines, from criminology, management, public administration, labor relations, and political science. Our intention is to work in a transdisciplinary environment, which is a challenge, and we do our best. Transuse, I'm moving to my second point. I invite you, obviously, to visit our webpage, where you can find our activities and publications in several languages, etc. What's the involvement of Transuse in the project? We knew about the project in 2016 in the annual meeting of the European Group of Public Law, a part of the European Public Law organizations, in a meeting organized by Mr. Andrea Di Maio, who is with us. And immediately we fall in love with the project, because we thought and we think that it's an interesting and important project. Since 2016, we have developed several activities last year, and actually in 2018, we are still working in the project. So at the beginning, we had the opportunity of attending the meeting in Washington in November 2016 in the context of the Law, Justice, and Development Week. And we tried to help, we did our best, we tried to help in drafting a matrix of essential and optional principles guiding the model. Last year, following our work, we had several meetings in Barcelona and in Madrid with government officials of the Spanish government and the Catalan government, and with business representatives in Barcelona, talking and disseminating ideas about the project and exchanging points of view. And we closed the week with a workshop which took place at the law school in Barcelona about the project. And I must say that it was an interesting week talking about the project. And finally, lately, we have had some works in relation to the project. Dr. Eva Andres, who is another member of the Transuse, and she's not here today, published an interesting brief article about carrots and sticks, about economic, in that case, carrots, economic incentive for companies in order to implement the model. It was published in an international review in English, in an international journal, sorry, in English. And we, in Transuse, we translated it to Spanish with the intention, with the same intention to disseminate ideas, to engine discussion, especially in Spanish-speaking countries. Finally, we had the opportunity of inviting Professor De Amicis. Professor De Amicis is one of the peer reviewers of the project, and we had another interesting meeting in Barcelona last January, I think, where we discussed again with him and other people some aspects of the model. So, Taking into account all our activities, what's our perspective? What's some of our ideas just for discussion? I think that we will open discussion after our speeches. In our opinion, and I think that we can agree with that, the idea of the project is gaining momentum. In what sense? Well, we have several indicators. My colleague has just underlined activities in Paris, but I would like to underline the recent Nobel Prize for Economics, which was awarded to William Nordhaus and Paul Romer, and the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences underlined that the prize was awarded because they won the prize because both academics tried to face one important question: how, you can see it on the slide, how we create long-term sustainable economic growth. I think that it's perfectly in line with our ideas and worries. From our point of view, we do believe that ethical principles and related values should be the basis of the guiding principles of the model. We think that they are the foundations of the project in some sense. And Thomas has mentioned corruption, for example. And we do agree that corruption is an important point to be considered. We have the convention, the UN Convention on Corruption. We have the OECD Convention. The OECD is a global leader in that field, and we think that it's an important point to discuss and to take into account. We work on that point in our presentation in Washington in November 2016, and we find that that kind of area allows us to specify some beautiful and abstract ideas to more, how to say that, workable principles and mechanisms related to different aspects. We have mentioned bribery, but lobbies or conflicts of interest, the role of whistleblowing, for example, et cetera, and the important role too of banks, the financial sector, and especially that point of intersection between public and private, which is the area of public services, or if you prefer in the European terminology, services of general interest, in which we have private companies working with the idea of profit, but at the same time developing essential activities for the community. And I think that there are interesting international development, including European developments, but not only, too, in South America, about that area of intersection. And to sum up my intervention and to give the floor to Dr. Ortega, we think that we have excellent contributions. Today we have 3 excellent papers, and I would like to congratulate the authors for the papers, and it's a good base for our discussion. And I think that probably increasing reflection on indicators, it could be a good idea to make more specific our reflections. And I would say that advancing in a first implementation stage could be interesting just for testing and rectifying and learning by doing, in some sense. And in that aspect, I would like to give the floor to Marta Ortega to give us some ideas about that window of opportunity opened by the metropolitan area of Barcelona. So, Marta, please.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So,
No, I can.
you can.
I can work for you.
Okay, thank you. Well, good morning to everybody. I am very pleased to be here, as we have been effectively very involved in the project, as Julie has expressed. Thank you to Marco Nicoli for being so confident in our task since January 2016. So thank you to Unidroit for hosting the act and for being also very involved in the project, as we have learned in particularly in one of our meetings in January 2016. Well, basically, to add a few more information, regarding what Julie has said regarding our task. In Pillar 1, as coordinators of Pillar 1 of the Human-Centered Enterprise Project, I must say that Transuse has decisively contributed to the framing of the guiding principles of the Human-Centered Enterprise, which includes three types of principles: social sustainability principles, environmental sustainability principles, and ethics and anti-corruption principles. In fact, all these issues have been broadly and dealt at diverse instances by the OECD through its guidelines for multinational enterprises, by the Global Compact of the UN, as you already know. But in fact, the code of guiding principles, which is eventually non-compulsory for companies, but voluntarily accepted by them, adds the value of being a more comprehensive instrument, and an exhaustive instrument. And we really believe that this is an added value for all what have been done in this area before. And all our work encompasses all what has been done previously. I also have to highlight that regarding the social aspect or the social sustainability that I mentioned of the principles, I must highlight the work of the International Labour Organization, obviously. Well, and this said, in a much more practical stance, we have approached the metropolitan area of Barcelona in order to find out and to have a perception of their interest in the project. So we have approached the metropolitan area of Barcelona on the assumption that the metropolitan area of Barcelona provides the right framework to pilot and implement the project. And we've got a very good response from the metropolitan area of Barcelona. In fact, they have expressed their interest in the project, their interest in being fully involved in the project, and their will to financially contribute to the project. So this is really good news, I believe, for the project. And I insist on the idea that this departs from the assumption that the metropolitan area provides the adequate framework for the implementation and piloting of the project. In fact, I must say that legally, from a legal perspective, the metropolitan area of Barcelona is a supra-municipality public entity. It was created in year 2010 through the law approved by the Catalan Parliament by unanimity. And the metropolitan area has its own normative competences in the field of environment, Particularly, it works in the field of waste, water, air. It works in the field of, it has competence as well as in the area of transport, and it has, amongst others, competences regarding territorial, economic, and social cohesion. So, in order for you to learn about how the metropolitan area, I mean, its competence and its characteristics, its features, I must say as well that the metropolitan area of Barcelona covers the most industrialized municipalities of Catalonia and Spain. It includes 32 municipalities of the province of Barcelona. This includes Barcelona, Gavà, Hospitalet, Cornellà, and others. It has a surface of more than 600 kilometers. More than 3 million people live in the area. It is one, in fact, considering the European region, one of the biggest metropolitan areas of Europe, and it has a strategic and relevant economic position in the Mediterranean region. Regarding the areas of interest of the metropolitan area of Barcelona, that link with the project, with the human-centered model, the metropolitan area is heavily working regarding circular economy in the field of environmental protection, particularly dealing with issues of waste, water cycle, air pollution. It has another area of interest and work in employment and social justice, transparency. It has its own agency of transparency. It also deals with public procurement, and it includes an innovation cluster, which may be also of interest for the project. And well, specifically regarding circular economy, at present, the metropolitan area is participating in various European research projects in order to innovate from a technological perspective and to provide solutions concretely on urban waste management with the aim of promoting the model of circular economy. And in fact, the metropolitan area counts with experts in the field. On the other hand, I must say, I think this is of great interest also for the project. All types of enterprises work in the metropolitan area of Barcelona. Here we must mention big companies as Aguas of Barcelona, which is Barcelona Waters, and which belongs to the French Suez Group. And this company particularly has a strong compromise in social and environmental sustainability. We have to mention also the big pharma buyer, which has also a strong compromise in the field of sustainability, as well as the other company, SEAT, which belongs to the Volkswagen Group, as very active, big companies which represent, let's say, the big companies' size sector. We also, we have, the metropolitan area also includes all small and medium enterprises. Some of them have also a strong social and environmental compromise. I am very pleased here to say that one of them is Bella Aurora, which is a cosmetics company, a medium-sized company, and the ex-CEO of the company, Mr. Fueyo, is here today. Well, I must highlight that because honestly, they have done a lot regarding particularly social rights of workers. And finally, to mention what the metropolitan area is doing in this field, I have to say that the metropolitan area also includes public companies dedicated or specifically specialized in dealing and managing waste. I have just mentioned that they have public companies dealing with waste collection and integral waste recovery, And the metropolitan area counts as well with an eco park. So, well, that's all I wanted to tell you, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now, Margherita Bianchini, which is General Counsel, is that correct, of Assonime, the Association of Listed Companies in Italy, will talk about benefit companies in Italy and some preliminary empirical data that they have collected, which I think is maybe very interesting for our purposes. Thank you. She has slides too, right?
What I'm doing? Okay, great. No? No, this is not mine.
No?
No.
Ah, un altro.
Per questo stavo cercando di tornare.
Sta qui.
Ecco, Bianchini.
Perfetto. Credo l'avessi già via.
No, perché no? Mi ero persa. Ok, me la via. Grazie. Ci vado da lì?
Sì, una clic qui.
Ok. Thank you very much. Thank you so much to UNIDROIT and OECD, particularly to Marco Nicoli, for inviting Assonime and me to this workshop. The first time Marco Nicoli shared with me the idea of the HCB project, I immediately told him, we have already the benefit corporation. Do you think we need another hybrid form of organization as a vehicle for such purposes? And this was the very beginning. That's why we are now talking about benefit. I am talking about benefit corporation. We started as Assonime, the Association of the Large Enterprise in Italy, to investigate and analyze the new legislation on benefit corporations since the beginning. And last year, we conducted a survey investigating the reality of the benefits corporation. And this is what I would like to share with you now. When we are talking about benefit corporation, we are talking about firm purpose. Professor Ben has already mentioned the interesting project led by Colin Meyer, Oxford professor and expert in corporate governance and corporate finance matter. And I begin my my contribution exactly with some citation from his work. Over the last few years, the corporation has become an increasing focus for attention and debate. The reason for this is that companies have failed to live up to what was expected of them. There's been a substantial breakdown of trust in them. Originally, it was thought to be confined to the financial sector. More recently, the erosion of trust afflicts many parts of the corporate sector, from automobile to energy, from food to pharmaceutical. The request for a new approach to business and corporation is on the stage. The source of irresponsible business is not an individual, institutional, or corporate failure, as it is frequently presented as being, but a system design problem, and its resolution is reform, not revolution, in the system we have failed to create in our own image. On this regard, as mentioned by Professor Ben, the British Academy is carrying on a very interesting project named The Future of Corporation, and which is intended to propose a radical new approach to business and to corporation. What is the purpose of a company? Are the stockholders the only corporate constituency, and its purpose just to produce profits? Or there are at least two concepts of purpose. The positive one is a statement of what the company is there to do, to produce cheap or reliable goods and services. And the normative one, what it should do to look after its employees, to avoid pollution, to enhance the well-being of local community or society. The Italian Benefit Corporation, La Società Benefit, represent a great innovation for the Italian corporate law. It was almost a surprise. Benefit corporation as sustainable form of organization come out in Italy like a bolt from the blue. No practice nor academic debate announced the new legislation. Senatore Del Barba brought the law at the end, until the end, without any element announcing the successful project. A Model B Corp legislation does exist in 34, now 36 states of US, as Senator Del Barba already told us, and in Italy. The main innovation consists of the circumstance that hybrid organization form with a dual mission, profit and non-profit, are now regulated by law. This is really the key point. We have the possibility to choose between profit organization, dual mission organization, social enterprises. The new benefit corporation offers attractive advantages like a new branding enterprise, expanding funding streams, achieving sustainability goals, purpose stability. Someone is talking about the benefit corporation as an anti-escalation model. This is very interesting because it is a way to create a stable, a fixed purpose and against the possibility of takeover on the company itself. It is very, I mean, it's just a comment raised by academic, but it's very interesting to explore this possibility. The Italian Benefit Corporation is a profit corporation with a double mission. Purpose aims to balance shareholder interest and third-party benefit interest by means of a statutory provision. Public benefits must be addressed towards people, communities, territory, environment, culture, and social activities, institution, or association. As a consequence of the mission, of the double mission of the Benefit Corporation, specific directors' obligations are provided in this model. And the supervision of all the communication model is attributed to the supervision of the Consumer Protection Authority in Italy, the Antitrust Authority. It is also needed, there is also the faculty of option for a corporate specific brand. It's an option, it's not an obligation, like Società Benefit or SB. And a yearly report assessing the impact of corporate activity must be published on the website whenever existing and to the registry of companies. Another background information before analyzing the results of the empirical survey. The benefit, there is a distinction between benefit corporation and certified B Corp. The benefit corporation can be enacted only under specific statutory provision, allowing the dual mission of the company. When benefit corporation statutes are silent, for-profit corporate statutory and legislative rules will fill the gap. In addition, companies are able to obtain private certification as a B Corp issued by a private non-profit organization, BLAB, when the companies meet the governance and activity standard provided by BLAB standard setting. Those applicants meeting BLAB standards may, sorry for some mistakes, but I have a very intrusive corrector on my iPad, and sometimes very funny words appear along the text. May license the B Corp mark and are subject to audit by BLAB on an ongoing basis. Why an empirical research? Immediately after the enactment of the Società Benefit Law, Assonime, which has already been presented as Italian Major Companies Association and think tank, published a paper, so the real greedy profit as a companies association, published a paper illustrating this new hybrid organization corporate form and analyzing some of the questions arose from such innovative legislation. In the first 2 years of the benefit corporation life, academic debate focused on directors' liability, the right of withdrawal in case of introduction of the dual mission statutory provision on already established companies, the action rights of the benefit addressees in the shadow of the main question, which is the firm commitment and its purpose. However, before answering to all this question and in the impossibility of answering to the main question, which is the firm commitment and the purpose of the corporation, what it seemed necessary to us is to understand the current reality of the Italian Società Benefit, numbers, location, form of the organization, specific purpose stated by the statute, etc. The sources of our research conducted with the help of Cecilia Sertoli, which is a researcher of Assonime, were the business registry, press, and some specific website. The results of the surveys are now published in review, Analisi Giuridica dell'Economia, and I'm going to outline just a brief summary of the main topics. First of all, the number of benefit society. The success of an organization form is strictly connected to the number. And the number is a small number, but is an increasing trend. So the positive news is that increasing term, but the negative is that the number is just at March 2018, were about 173, but the beginning at August 2016 were 32. Where are in Italy the benefit corporation? Mostly in the north. The main number is in the north, then in the center, and few numbers in the south. As I already mentioned before, we have this two aspects, the possibility to choose a benefit corporation by a statutory provision, or the possibility to choose a certified B Corp. Sometimes the two are combined. So we have 150 Società Benefit, only Società Benefit by statutory provision, 41 certified B Corp by only certified B Corp, and 23 which are both Società Benefit and B Corp. The form of the organization mainly is a società a responsabilità limitata, limited liability company, just 10 corporation and some individual or individual business and cooperative, very few numbers. The huge number is represented by the limited company, limited liability company. Which kind of companies are there? The big three are companies with capital, with share capital from 37 million euro to 4 million euro. I mean, the number of the share capital is in the, on average, not a huge amount, but there are some exceptions. The specific benefit in this three case, for example, but we will see better later, that the specific benefit purpose, such as in this case, the first case is a clinic, patient or is a group managing medical activity and assistance to help people. The specific benefit purposes, such as patients' care, innovation, and research for medical therapy, are consistent with the business activity. And we will see that this is one of the main characteristics of the provision, of the statutory provision. We have observed that the benefit purpose clause often consists of a generic statement or a provision which represents a kind of emphasization of the business purpose clause. It does not state a significant change of the business activity or the addition of the different one, but for some exceptions. As an example of generic benefit purpose clause, the most part of the public benefit activity regards specific attitude or value of the economic business carried on by the company in different fields. For example, in agriculture, the respect for environment; in cosmetic field, the use of nature or byproduct; in hosting field, the inclusion, training, education, towards disadvantaged youth; in the field of waste, recycling; in construction, regeneration, and reuse. Among 173 companies included in the present survey, 47 of which represent more or less all the società benefit in Italy, 47 of them in the field of insurance, consultant, and software house companies reproduce the legislative provision. So a very general clause which says more or less that in addition to the profit purpose, one or more public benefit purposes and the companies may operate in a responsible, sustainable, and transparent way toward people, and so on. 13 companies refers to unmeasurables and undetermined purposes, such as the aim to employees' happiness, the dissemination of public happiness ideas, the satisfaction of employees' human needs like love, freedom, energy, the dissemination of music love. I think that we can do better in this regard. But we have very virtuous examples. Some companies modify their statutory purpose by means of specific and determinable benefit purpose in accordance with the real aim of the law, by providing to devote part and percentage of the profits to benefit purpose. This is really measurable and determined. By adding social activity, which are different from the core business of the company. Example given of specific public benefit purpose. In the SEVA SRL, in the operating the field of sustainable energy, as the benefit purpose provided in the statutory clause is the construction of photovoltaic plants in Africa, or in case of Pieces of Venice, the regeneration and reuse of material in Venezia's lagoon given to benefit to the public. The ESO SRL in the field of the waste recycling, the philosophy is someone's waste becomes someone else's good. So production of good at benefit of someone of waste, a wide public range. And the Orbit, a very interesting companies, which is an excellent example in the aerospace engineering field, which specific public benefit purpose is to prevent space pollution, something really real concrete. Or the example prepared by Cecilia, and which is nice for the colors, the Wami SRL, which use for any bottle you can give a donation of 100 liters of potable water to Africa. Is a project which is in a different territory from those where where the company is operating, and but connected with the core business of the company. Two generic benefit purpose clause may affect first of all, the possibility to determine the balance point between shareholders and stakeholder interests, and this at the widest discretion of directors' obligation. May affect the real effects of the statutory amendment and the consequent right of withdrawal for the former shareholders, the supervision activity by antitrust authority, and overall, the trust by consumer and benefit addressees, and the trust on this form of organization. The Società Benefit Law provides that the annual report on the benefit activity must be published on the website of the company whenever existing. The result of the survey shows that almost the half of the benefit companies does not have its own website. And even among the ones who have a website, many of them do not publish the annual report. The key point is which has been discussed in Italy after the introduction of Società Benefit statutory law, is that many benefit companies origin from companies which were already committed to social or environmental benefit purpose, even before amending their statutory law. Many other companies continue to be committed to social activity without amending their statutory law. This is a key point and a crucial point also for the future, which I can see in a positive perspective of the benefit corporation, which provide our legal system with a concrete model of dual mission corporation. But the key point is are to be considered benefit corporation only the ones with amended statute, or even those which realize benefit purpose in practice. This is where we are now. And in this survey, we can see all the elements to choose whether we want to move the chair towards the piano or the piano towards the chair. This is a very important choice for the future of benefits companies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So before opening the floor to the questions, I would like to make just a couple of remarks. Tom spoke about different drivers of compliance, and it must be a kind of a mixture. It's a combination of market expectations, normative models, and hard law, mandatory regulation, that they must be, they have to go together. And I think that's key also for our project. And on the other side, let's say, as a means of enforcement, as a, let's say, a preliminary aspect of enforcement, is the issue of metrics that Isabella talked about. So it's important to start entering into the idea that you have to find proper metrics for, she talked about human capital, but in general for all other not-for-profit goals. So when you step out of the purely profit-maximizing enterprise, and you go beyond corporate social responsibility, and you enter into the realm of hybrid goals, you need metrics to measure properly the goal, also to measure the performance on the not-for-profit aspect, not just with a yes or no, but also with a nuanced measurements. So I think these hints have been, these suggestions are perfectly fit with the human-centered business model to a certain extent, in the sense that it is voluntary, it is a voluntary adoption, but it has to be enforceable. So I think the key aspect of the, let's say, what we will have to think about and work on is enforcement given the metrics, let's say. So I hope that the pilot project will actually take place, and that will help also to, I would say, not fine-tune, but actually tune the model, understand what is actually measurable, what can be done, what cannot be done, and also begs the question on what instrument to use. And of course, the instrument of election is clearly, at least for those jurisdictions that provide for it, is a benefit corporation that has in itself the possibility to be a human-centered business model, to be a model that can be used for our let's say an organizational form that can be used for our human-centered business model. But that touches upon what has already emerged from the first empirical data. In order to have, you need to have a credible commitment, and so you need to have specific enough purposes to make it enforceable. You can't have generic purposes. Frankly, the diffusion of the love for music is probably more measurable than happiness. So it's to a certain, you can find some proxies for it, perhaps.
I can understand that in the first phase of the benefit corporation introduction, given that this model of corporation comes from a very ideal purpose and approach, and I understand that it is possible that at the very beginning also elements like love for life, happiness, or love for music can be inserted to underline the ideal approach of the model. But now I think that we are, and this is a good news, I mean, a good point, we can think to be at a second step of the life of benefit corporation. So we can start thinking about how to strengthen the corporate clause, the purpose corporate clause, in a way that gives more perspective to this life. So this is just because I love music too. So I'm very happy. I would like to join this firm in order to listen to music all over the day. So thank you.
So we have the possible instrument. We have some, let's say, some bearings, and this is of a model that is voluntarily adopted, but it may help in driving towards what was referred to by Isabella, Tom, and Juli Ponce, and also Margherita, about a new paradigm of how to do business. So I don't think it is necessary to think about it as a model that should apply to everyone, But indeed, once it is in the system, it is inevitable that it will drive, it will have attraction on also companies that do not specifically opt for this, for a hybrid goal. You must be always careful, however, that this should not be an instrument to further, well, okay, we'll talk about it this afternoon, but shareholder value has a great advantage that is kind of simple. It's simple to understand and it gives clear objectives. So Margherita already talked about it, talked about companies adopting the benefit corporation statute as an anti-takeover practice, so in protection. So we should avoid and this this could hinder the credibility, could harm the credibility of the whole model. You should avoid that a human-centered business model is used as an excuse for directors' increased discretion without control, and especially for places like Italy that have a history of concentrated ownership and a history of, let's say, prevarication over minority shareholder. It should not be the instrument for controlling shareholders under the cloak of long-term investment to oppress minority investors. That could be damaging to the model and could cause irreparable damage to its reputation, to its diffusion, I think. So these are my only remarks, and now I'll open the floor to the questions. Thank you. Are there any questions from the public? Please.
My name is Habib Sedei, and I teach in LUMSA University here in Rome. I teach systems thinking and for management of SDGs. I was wondering why till now Italy has not proposed say an area, a metropolitan area for the pilot project. You have many things. We have. I'm Italian, actually. We have a lot of culture. We have a lot of experience, as you said, in the area of benefit, società benefit. So why not to propose, as Barcelona proposed, another pilot, and we can be, all of us, I mean, many of us can be, Italian people can be interested to be involved on a pilot, because the pilots will be mostly important to have success in pilot projects. Once we have success on them, we have a good, trace to go on with. This is the first question. But
well, I think that maybe Marco Nicola is the right person to answer this question, even if I remember that you tried to do that in Italy, and maybe Rome has too many problems to manage. No. Yes, this was just...
Yes. Well, the issue is the following. We will have in February a formal meeting in the framework of the OECD Development Center with all the members, both both OECD and non-OECD countries. So that will be the institutional event where we are going to really present the project, and we will solicit the members, both OECD governments and non-OECD governments, to consider applying for a pilot project. I'm Italian. I'm a strong supporter of our country. However, I have serious concerns about the good timing of proposing this, the bureaucracy but we are open to any country. I mean, so far we have the expression of interest of Barcelona. We have been there before. Transjuice did a great job. We had a large participation of entrepreneurs from the small, medium, and large enterprises, including the owner of Aurora, which is over here. So they paved the way, in a certain sense, they paved the way for this kind of possible engagement. So let's see what will be the reaction of the different, members of the OECD Development Center to the project and to the proposal.
Perhaps Senator Del Barba. Wonderful.
Yes.
Could,
He's the right person.
That's why I say it.
I don't know if I am the right person, but I would like to say something about what you have proposed, of course. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Ban, the name is Ban, okay, because you said what I'm going to say for many years, but I am a political, I can't say what you said. You said we need to rethink the entire project of capitalism. I wrote this sentence with your name, so by now I will say the Professor Ban said, but if we need to think and to redesign the entire project of capitalism, we need a new concept of company, a new concept of corporation. So we need this project and we need benefit corporation. So about your remark, I think that Italy could be now a right country for a pilot of this kind, because you don't need anymore a special legislation. You have it. You don't need anymore an agreement with the government, but you need agreement with local government. I would like to say you that the city of Milan, for instance, the actual mayor Beppe Sala, in his electoral campaign, explicitly indicated he wanted to transform Milan in the city of corporate benefit corporation. And maybe the city of Florence, with the mayor Dario Nardella, could be another place where to experiment this kind of project, because just 1 month ago, they transformed the local municipality pharmacy in a benefit corporation, and they want to transform all companies participated by the municipality in benefit corporation, and they are very interested in this theme. Finally, I want to announce that we are going to create a association, a national association of benefit corporation, and I think it could be useful for a kind of project like yours.
Thank you. Please, Ms. Costa of the, Ms. sorry, just from the Global Forum, right?
Yeah. Just one question related to this point, because the human-centered business model is not a model for just developed countries. It's also a model for developing and emerging countries, where the bureaucracy and the rules could be really complicated. So maybe this is one point we must address in the human-centered business model. It's to how help countries and government to implement the project, to take the measure in their own legal system, in their own rules, to implement the system. Because I think, if it's difficult for Italy, what's the point in other countries in another place of the world? I'm not going to say anything on this. I'm the World Bank.
It's really interesting that you should mention that. A couple of weeks ago, I attended the UNCTAD World Investment Forum, which attracted over 6,000 delegates and 1,700 corporations. So I think it's quite interesting to see the level of private sector interest. But what I was particularly struck by, and then again, I think we always need to think about potential entry points. So there are many presentations by various ministers and also in particular, those responsible for investment promotion within their own jurisdiction. So this included the least developed countries as well as developing countries and on that end of the, let's say, economic development scale. And as they were giving their sort of short speeches to explain what they're doing to attract investment, what really struck me is how many times they said human capital. We're going to focus on the development of human capital. And so in the back, I actually started counting, but I realized it wasn't very scientific. But it struck me that perhaps approaching these heads of the development agencies for the least developed and developing countries, looking at what they're doing a little bit of homework, what are they doing really about human capital? And then maybe using that as an introduction to saying, well, there's a way you could set up a corporate form that would encourage companies to behave this way in the private sector, which would reinforce, of course, what they're trying to do, because their aim is to attract obviously much foreign investment as well. So to the extent I think they could, again, building the ecosystem idea, there may be a point there that we could someone here or perhaps get funding to actually look at investment development plans and where human capital falls into that and use that as a reason to have a conversation, if nothing else.
Please.
I would like to make some considerations regarding the question of whether the model should be mandatory or just voluntary, accepted by enterprises. Obviously, it's too early to assume that this model could be accepted, could be imposed on a mandatory basis. We discussed along about the issue. This is not feasible now, but I think there is effectively a change in the business culture, and that international organizations have a lot to say in this. And basically, I would like to add to this that I believe that business schools should be involved in the model, in the sense that this is what the future generations should see as normal all over the world. And this could be the way that at a later stage, the model could become a compulsory model. Just that.
Is it on? Yeah, it is. Just a little bit of thinking on the developing countries and their involvement and potential to identify partners, not just governments, but also companies and maybe even multinationals, which have very much vested interest in specific countries where we go. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development, incredible platform where majority of more progressive thinking developing country companies are involved. Already quite a lot of preparedness on sustainable business development. The difference between intentions and action, quite serious. But through even my personal contacts at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, I think we can bring specific selection of companies depending on which country which we want to go. and we get a lot of support through the Business Council Secretariat because they have projects, not only on the human capital, and very important for me personally as a sustainability professional for many years is to keep them together, natural and human capital. They are interwoven together in the community's interests and benefits. So, suggestion, let's try to tie things to the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And it's not going to be difficult because they are already trying to build energy and momentum.
I just wanted to endorse what you said because, of course, the Social and Human Capital Protocol was developed by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, along with an advisory group of 20 companies. So that could be a good starting list. And Peter Backer, who's the president and CEO of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, is actually chairing this coalition that is going to release this protocol on social and human capital early in the new year. So there are a number of points, I think, of interest, and it also relates to some of these broader questions about trust and so forth. And I was also just reminded of something I haven't thought of for some time, but in terms of what other companies on the developing side could be brought in, I think the idea of supply chain, I mean, the companies that are actually drawing on those companies for their supply chain, it's also a business reason for them to do this because it's going to create better partners for them around the world, more reliable, less risk, better reputation. And we all have seen how even a small catastrophe in the supply chain could have huge impacts on management, on reputational risk, and all the attendant publicity and negative consequences that's associated. So I think bringing along and bringing up the smaller partners in developing countries that are within these larger global supply chains, and which of course is a theme of development, especially, for example, to bring in women-owned business and so forth. That could be a very interesting entry point to also introduce this idea of having a human-centered model.
Is there anybody else? Because, I mean, I cannot stop myself continuing on that point. Specific thoughts on governance, because governance as an energy builder toward the transformation, how to change the corporate governance, traditional way of doing things toward business as unusual. I have worked for years with South African companies. I have been involved even in the development of the King report through Mervyn King. And this was how we went toward integrated reporting. The whole integrated reporting initiative, in a way, was born through a lot of experimentation in South Africa and through Global Reporting Initiative experimentations. So South Africa and the whole implementation of the King Code throughout the Commonwealth, including incredibly difficult countries in Africa, like Angola, Nigeria. I mean, these are places in the developing world where we have already the mindset in governments and the mindset starting to build up in other stakeholders. We should try to align with these developments as well. And what the King report has been doing for years in transforming corporate governance is incredible, and specifically in Africa.
In this regard, at the European level, one of the second important traces of this philosophy in the law is the directive on the disclosure of non-financial information. This is really changing the reporting of the big companies because it is addressed for the moment just to the big company. But I think that it is a process, that this kind of reporting would be addressed also to other minor dimension company. But this is changing in deep the process of reporting internally of the multinational and big company. And from the reporting to the strategy is a backward movement that we are really observing. So this is one of the another pillar of the changement, which must be really kept in mind when discussing of this matter. Thank you.
In the same vein, just a few words. I agree completely with you. And actually, another area, Africa, of course, and another area that we have, that we keep in mind is South America. This is why we translated ex officio the Dr. Eva Andres' paper. And I mean, in that sense, Transuse is open to translate other papers and to disseminate in Spanish, because we have talked about that, but like in Africa, Asia, obviously, but in that aspect, South America is one of our areas of academic influence. So, yeah, I completely agree.
I'm just reminded that I am going to have to write a memo with all these links to these resources, because speaking of Mervyn King, it is true he's chairman of the International Integrated Reporting Council. And my breath was taken away by his 2018 address, his speech that he gave on that occasion, because I think it really has a very visionary sweep of what this kind of reporting can do. One of the other really valuable resources that's on that website is a report that was, and this is important, developed in collaboration with the Association of International Certified Public Accountants. Okay, this is where you need to be, I think, if you're going to move the needle on valuation. And it notes in particular the benefits of bringing financial and non-financial information together. So I think there's movement here that I think that if we start examining these movements, to think about how we can use it to advance what we're trying to do here. And it's sort of mutual as well. I think feeding what we're doing into those agenda and then looking at what they're doing and saying, how can we use that to create momentum or funding or a research cluster? So I just had to say that because I was also thinking about Mervyn King.
Okay, if there's no more questions, thank you very much to all the speakers. Thank you for attending. And let's go for lunch and reconvene at 2:30. We can 2:40, let's say, 2:40, for our afternoon workshop on the governance issues. Is it here or?
Yes, just wanted to give some more information. So the lunch will be upstairs, second floor, where we were before with for the coffee break. You can leave your things over here. Just keep in mind, don't be surprised, because we are going, during our lunch break, we're going to change the room setting. We'll have a round table, a U table. So you can leave your stuff over here, but don't be scared. No one is going to touch your things. We just need to move. Maybe one smart decision could be to put your things in that row of desks over there, because we will only move these desks over here. So, but you can leave it definitely over here. It will be well guarded.
Senti Marco, ora per noi.